You've got big projects to tackle, but your day gets swallowed up by repetitive tasks and constant inquiries. It's hard to make progress when you're stuck putting out fires. That's where Element 451's AI assistants come in. Acting like an extra set of hands, you get your time back for the high-impact projects. Ready to reclaim your time? Visit element451.com/AI team to learn more.
Welcome to the Hired Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell, Community Engagement Lead at Pathify. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. The Hired Geek Podcast is a proud member of the Enrollify podcast network, a robust collection of shows designed to help higher education professionals like you grow every day. Explore all of our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 261, our kickoff episode of our 2025 season. We're going to be back going strong with weekly episodes throughout the year. So get excited and really excited to kind of continue to get some new and interesting people, get folks to return to the show that we really like talking to. And I know last year was just an incredible season and really powerful for me to get some really cool people that I've always wanted to talk to and kind of share their insights, folks that I really look to keep up with the pulse of what's going on in higher ed in this moment. So our episode today, episode 261, with Rob Buelow from Vector Solutions. This is a really interesting conversation. We were acknowledging and sort of grappling with the kind of tumultuous kind of nature of this moment in higher ed and trying to kind of lasso that down and dig in with some of the data Vector Solutions has pulled together from their institutional partners and how to kind of see through kind of the noise and the fog of war by really looking kind of the hard data, because I know sometimes things can kind of get, maybe blown out of proportion or not emphasized enough. So I really appreciate Rob coming on to discuss kind of a tough topic and some of the headlines around like affirmative action and other sort of forces that are causing kind of the disruptions, and then to really contextualize it and what is actually happening, what is the actual behaviors, and enrollment trends for institutions, and what kind of students are we seeing entering into higher education. The COVID cohort of students who kind of went through, their entire high school experience through the pandemic, coming into higher education, what does that mean? Who are they? What do they look like? What are their needs? So just really excited to kick off this year's season with this awesome conversation with Rob Buelow. Rob, if you would like to introduce yourself, give an overview of your professional background, and explain a bit about what Vector Solutions does.
Fantastic. Hey, Dustin. So Rob Buelow, I am a higher ed guy in both passion and profession. I've spent the last 18 years either working at or with colleges and universities in a variety of roles as a student activist, a student affairs administrator and prevention practitioner, an alumni council member, an entrepreneur, and now as the general manager of education at Vector Solutions, where we work with about 2,000 higher ed institutions, reaching about 10 million students, staff, and faculty every year. I'm also a public health professional by training, so making positive social impact at that kind of scale is pretty awesome. And Vector as an organization is the leading provider of SaaS technology that's built to make organizations and individuals safer, smarter, and better. We work with over 50% of all K-12 school districts and colleges in the country, as well as thousands of companies, government agencies, and municipalities. And at higher ed, we've been serving colleges and universities for over 20 years with a mission of helping schools drive lasting, large-scale change on issues that have a huge impact on students, staff, and faculty. So our online programs cover mental health, sexual assault and harassment, alcohol and substance misuse, inclusion and belonging, as well as career readiness, job safety skills, cybersecurity, facilities maintenance. We got it all.
Yeah, I was really excited, when kind of got the chance to have this conversation with you. I think, just your background, the scope of what Vector Solutions does is pretty wide. And I think, sometimes that's like a gift and a curse. I feel like it's like we could have talked about any number of things for certain, but kind of wanting to have this be a little bit more of like a timely episode. We're recording this the end of 2024. This is going to be one of our newer episodes for the 2025 season. There's going to be kind of a bit of kind of fog of war, blurriness, kind of ambiguity with what this calendar year is going to mean for higher ed. But, one big thing is just kind of the continuing reckoning of the rollback of affirmative action in higher education. So a lot of implications there about student access, but even just sort of how staff are sort of navigating it with policies and, all those sort of things. So I think that those ripple effects are still kind of going out. But I'm just really appreciating you sort of coming on, being willing to have this conversation. Obviously, just a lot to discuss here. We'll cover as much as we can in the time that we have. But just from your perspective, from your position and just sort of, news that you're following and all that kind of stuff, what have you seen as the current climate for professionals who are, navigating this rollback of affirmative action in higher education?
Gosh, Dustin, starting the new season with a really big, meaty question. So let's set the stage a little bit. So we can safely say that the past couple of years have been particularly tumultuous in higher ed in the realm of identity politics. So over a dozen states have introduced or passed legislation on limiting DE&I efforts. The October 2023 attack on Israel by Hamas and the corresponding war in Gaza sparked widespread protests that led to 5 Ivy League presidents stepping down from their posts. So that's the backdrop that we have. So now let's talk about the rollback of affirmative action. The Supreme Court case, which was brought by Students for Fair Admissions against Harvard and UNC, was centered around the argument that race-conscious admissions policies unfairly discriminated against Asian American applicants and provided advantages for Black, Hispanic, and Native American applicants. And the Supreme Court agreed, and they rolled back several decades of race-conscious admissions practices in higher education. So, coming into this academic year, there was a lot of interest in what the impact would be on the demographic makeup of this fall's incoming student class. And so I'll really talk about, there's been 3 predominant sets of data that are swirling around in my head that each have unique findings and unique implications. So a lot of this coverage was really sparked with major media outlets that were really looking at a handful of highly selective colleges. And what they were reporting on is that Black student enrollment indeed has gone down significantly at those schools. One of the other things that came out of that coverage was some of the challenges in the differences in methodology that these schools are using to measure and report on the racial demographics of their students. And that actually sparked a bit of our interest at Vector, where we saw an opportunity to look at our own data to kind of peek at the broader national landscape through the lens of a consistent methodology for asking about race. So we looked at survey response data from our online programs, looking at about 620,000 first-year students across 350 colleges. And what we saw at that sort of national level was certainly verified some of the things that we're seeing at the elite institutions. We've got 14 of the top 20 U.S. News and World Report ranked colleges as our partners and in that data set. And we saw some of the similar things that were reported on by the major media outlets. But nationally, enrollments of students of color and Black students specifically increased ever so slightly in our data, looking at first-year students across 350 colleges. Some schools, both small public and small private institutions, saw more significant increases in student of color enrollment, whereas medium and large private institutions had more notable declines. So that was the Vector data. And just yesterday, so we're talking, Monday, December 2nd, there was a study that was released by the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center looking at enrollment data spanning 1.4 million 18-year-old first-year students. And that data showed that enrollment overall in higher ed was down 5% compared to last year. And you'll note, if you're into higher ed in the way that I think everybody listening here is, last year was the first time we actually saw a marginal increase in enrollment for the first time in over a decade in higher ed. It's not a great finding, but they went on to look deeper at the racial demographics of that 1.4 million 18-year-old first-year students and saw that white 18-year-old enrollment had been the most significant decline of any racial category this year, dropping 10% between fall 2023 and fall 2024. However, at the most selective colleges and universities, enrollment of students of color was disproportionately down compared to white students. So 3 different sets of data, all kind of looking at things slightly differently, and all had kind of different implications on practice. And I'm happy to go into what that looks like.
Clearly, yeah, a takeaway is like, it's complicated, it's ambiguous, it's like just further adding to kind of the headwinds that higher ed is facing right now is just like the fewer students enrolling. So, it's more competitive. It's, a lot of that scrutiny and different things that you're mentioning, and just like changing of policies that kind of been in place for a while. And, even like the FAFSA fiasco of last year, like, there's no shortage of things that are making it hard for institution leaders and their staffs to be just navigating this moment and being accessible for, all students, and making sure that they're, creating environments that are conducive for their retention and success and satisfaction, graduation and everything. So I think like that's just like, to me, it's, ever since 2020, like there just hasn't been a year where I feel like it's been very like stable, like there's just been, the looming enrollment cliff on the horizon, and, these sort of existential crises of, one thing or another happening in higher ed. So I think like this is just like another example of, some of those things, like just what's become kind of, more commonplace, where like, higher ed kind of prides itself on sort of like, being these venerable institutions that have existed for hundreds of years, and, they kind of stand in the face of like rapid change and everything. So I think it's, made it very tough.
Yeah, I mean, Dustin, you put your finger on a couple really unique, potentially anomalous elements of this year's data that have real like practical implications on higher ed leaders, on enrollment and recruitment professionals. So, I mean, the FAFSA debacle didn't help anything. More specifically than that, when you look at the demographic breakdown of incoming first year students, one of the ripple effects of the FAFSA delays is the impact that it had on students getting their merit aid packages. And so students were needing to make decisions about where they wanted to go to college based on incomplete information about what their aid was going to look like. And so they were making decisions about what they thought they could afford, not knowing, fully what those packages would look like. And, that certainly is going to have differential impact on different students. Certainly the demographic cliff and the fact that there's less 18-year-old graduating high school seniors now in 2025 than there ever has been is an impact on the number of students eligible of that sort of traditional aged population to come to college. But what we're seeing is certainly the elite institutions are thinking more about how and where they're recruiting. There was a recent interview on NPR with the president of Dartmouth, and she was talking about how Dartmouth is focusing on, recruitment in rural communities, and how, they're tailoring their messaging to bring in more veterans to their applicant pool. And so I think that's, kind of across the board, the elites know that they've got a challenge that they need to solve to continue to have student bodies that reflect the national population. But on the more national scale, certainly the National Student Clearinghouse data indicates that there's less graduating high school seniors that see college as the step that's right for them after high school. And that really, I think, comes down to how we communicate and speak to the value of a college degree. And as costs are going up and more options than ever exist to get job readiness training or just to go right into the workforce, higher education has to better articulate the impact of the experience of college and the skills that you are building that are going to prepare you to be more effective when you graduate in your careers and in your communities. And then, I have to say, like, what's interesting about the data that we published at Vector is, like, we're looking at a specific subset of institutions, 350 colleges, 620,000 students. But these are colleges that have made an investment in our technology, which is focused on proven effective strategies for creating safer, healthier, more inclusive communities in higher education. And so it could well be that the schools that are using our technology look different, recruit differently than schools that maybe are not as invested in creating communities of care and well-being for their learners. And we've certainly seen, Dustin, schools that are using prevention and well-being technology in more powerful ways are significantly more likely than schools that aren't to have higher retention rates, to the order of like 10% differences. So it makes sense to potentially hypothesize that could trickle into their recruitment and enrollment practices as well, and how they promote themselves as a community where everybody can fit in and belong. And of course, these are all hypotheses, and data is not going to give you all the answers, but sometimes it's going to help you define the question that you want to ask next, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely where I kind of want to head next is like talking about kind of technology's role, and like you're saying, like it's sort of being a good indicator of sort of like leveraging technology in the ways that you're mentioning, like can be an indicator of, okay, well, they at least have the right mindset of creating sort of, cohesive digital experiences or just engaging student experiences, on their campus and online, and then just even bringing in those tools to do their best work as an institution for their students. But quick reflections before we get to that, though, is like what I think is the interesting thing, because you're like, oh, like we're analyzing these institutions and our partners, all that is like on one hand, it's like some of the bigger headlines from last year affected everybody equally, like policy changes or like Supreme Court decisions, fast forward, it's like affects every institution, and they all kind of have to deal with it in their own ways. But then like, I know reading that story that you're mentioning from yesterday is like, my worry is sometimes like, again, we're just like navigating this climate, we're needing to innovate, we're needing to change and improve and all that like the FAFSA thing for last year would just be sort of this like scapegoat. It's like, oh, well, that's why enrollment's down. Is like this thing that was out of our control. It affected everybody. And when we're, the same thing kind of the pandemic, if it's like, oh, if there's like sort of difficulties or disruptions, it's like, oh, it's just that thing that was out of our control that we had no responsibility for, whatever. We can just sort of like keep doing what we're doing, sort of have the, kind of faith that everything would just like work out in the end without having to make anything to actually make that so. So that's just like my one quick reflection. But, I think to, try to give more agency, give more sort of opportunity for institutions. I think leveraging technology in a smart, intentional way, is a great way to sort of gird yourself against all these sort of like massive changes. Like if you're making investments into your tech stack and everything, that is a way to make sure like, okay, we are utilizing all of our options and the resources that are out there to try to ensure that we're in a strong kind of sustainable position and everything. So to kind of expand on kind of what you were getting at there, can you just say a little bit more about how you see ed tech playing a role in achieving, diverse classes of students that are retained and successful?
Yeah. So, I'll probably avoid talking about more of the upstream recruitment practices, but, thinking about the ed tech solutions like what we have at Vector, there's a particularly powerful role that they can play in making students feel like they belong, like their college experience and community is a good fit for them. So technology allows you to engage students in hyper-personalized ways, which is hard to scale with people alone. I worked as the violence prevention coordinator at the University of California, Irvine, and we had great programs in place to reach all of our incoming students and orientations, and that's scalable in some ways. But I couldn't have a unique, personalized, adaptive conversation with every single student in that auditorium that was coming into the school. Technology can let you do that, and we're practicing that in some of our online learning programs at Vector. So, we've got a program called Alcohol EDU for College. It's actually the first of its kind online prevention program ever created for higher education. It's had 8 published peer-reviewed efficacy studies. And part of what we do in that program is not make the assumption that all incoming college students are drinkers or intend to have alcohol be part of their college experience. And that's really responsive to the fact that over the past 15, 20 years, we've seen an increasing number of students coming onto campus as non-drinkers and abstainers. So if we go into a program about alcohol and drug abuse prevention saying, we know you're going to drink, or you shouldn't drink if you're under 21, you're already alienating those students who are like, I don't drink. I don't want that to be the central part of my college experience. And the fact that you're telling me that makes me feel like it is part of the culture here. And I don't know that I'm going to fit in there. So we take those students and we ask them up front, like, do you use alcohol and drugs? How much have you drank over the past 2 weeks or the past year? And if they say not at all, they've got a different educational experience in our program that reinforces their decision not to drink. And those that are engaging in high risk behaviors also have an adaptive experience for them to mitigate risk, to get them to more often choose to drink less or to not drink at all, and to normalize non-drinking behavior. So I think that's really powerful, especially in the face of, digital natives that care about hyper-personalized touch of a button convenience. I'd say the other aspects is like, how you engage those communities. So it's a digital environment. Engagement looks a little differently, but we're also asking those abstainers, hey, do you want to get connected with other people who choose not to drink on your campus? And if they say yes, their name goes into a list that administrators can build activities to bring those students together and create communities where they realize they're not the only ones that are choosing not to drink on campus. Or you've got hundreds of students that are going to opt in and say, yeah, I want to get involved in sexual assault prevention programs, or I want to see these alcohol-free events offered at my school. That can all shape the way that you follow up with those students, that you engage students as change makers, how you invest future resources. That really kind of gets down to the data that can be an output of these programs. I mean, I don't have to tell the folks that are listening here, like, we're not always flush with resources or dollars or people to support these sorts of programs. And so you want to make sure every minute and dollar that you spend is focused on things that are your community's needs or strengths. And absent having data, you're going to fall back on anecdotes, the squeaky wheel stories that you hear from your community, something that you personally witnessed that might not be reflective of what's actually going on, or maybe a broader challenge. Like, we know that this is an issue that many schools are facing, so we're going to invest our money on addressing it here. But what if it's not an issue at your school? You just brought in a speaker for $5,000 to talk about a problem that you don't have. We don't have the luxury to be flippant with our resources, and we owe our students more in the way that we're supporting them. So the data is super important. And I'll just put a bow on it too, Dustin, and saying, like, simply doing this work and investing in these technology programs that foster well-being and belonging, it sends the message to your community that I care about you. I am invested in your success. And the implications of that are huge. Students that participate in online prevention programs, we found in our data, were 50% more likely than those that didn't to feel valued in the classroom, to report being happy to be at that college, to feel like they fit in. All of those things are linked to academic performance and persistent. They are mission drivers and they're business drivers. And interestingly, those students also felt more qualified and prepared for future jobs. I mean, think about the skills that you're building when you're talking about interpersonal communication or cultural competence or ethical decision-making. Those are exactly the things employers want in the next generation of people that they're hiring. So it's a win-win-win across the board.
I appreciate you sharing like those insights and everything. 'Cause, I think like being informed about who your students are, who they actually are, versus like making assumptions and, kind of personalizing the engagement opportunities, the educational opportunities that you're sort of, building outside the classroom, I think is just really smart. And I think that we have, ample opportunities to do that. And that being kind of a good way to make more tactical sort of adjustments and pivots around sort of like, okay, we're doing this, but how we do it can be better aligned with, who our students actually are, what they're interested in learning, and, creating those opportunities for, more kind of values based and kind of kind of affinity based or whatever kind of, community opportunities and everything. So I think, broadly, what I was sort of reflecting on is I think, any human being, I think often we feel this way is that like, am I the only one that feels blank? Like in that idea of normalizing being like, no, you're not the only one that, is abstaining from, drinking or whatever else, or like, is interested in one thing or another, and like, kind of trying to be the man behind the curtain or something, where like you can kind of glean those insights, and you don't even have to necessarily like lead really heavily with it. I feel like you can just kind of like know that these students have sort of opted in to be like, hey, I'm interested in X, Y, or Z. You directly market to those people who have opted in to be, interested in, receiving information about one thing or another. And you kind of create opportunities that are going to be sort of exciting to that group and everything. So I don't know, like, that is like a way, like you said, to like not feel like you have to really kind of like build something completely novel or new or sort of like completely change what you're doing, like just making adjustments and informing that with insights from your student population, I think is very much time well spent. And I think it is a way that, technology is affording opportunities to, I guess, like augment the work. It's not like replacing anything. I think that's always like the fear is like, education being deeply human. Like, how can we leverage technology to help sort of inform or augment or sort of supplement what we're doing to make it more intentional and effective?
It can be a foundation that you can build on with everything else. And you're going to be surprised to see how many students do opt in and raise their hands and say, I want to get involved in these things. I care about these things. And you're putting your finger on something. An old mentor from my undergrad institution had said to me, we say we want to meet people where they are, but we end up meeting them where we want them to be. And Dustin, like, that's not where change happens. Change happens when you meet people where they are, for better, for worse, for indifferent. Meeting them where they are is the best way to get them engaged on where we want to go together. And you're right. Like, people do often misperceive that they are alone in the positive beliefs and behaviors and expectations they have. You think about the party scene where you see someone taking an intoxicated person into a bedroom at a party, and you look at that situation like, oh, like that seems not okay. It seems like a risk, but I don't see anybody else doing anything. So maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm misinterpreting this situation. Maybe if I do something here, no one's going to support me. Maybe this is what college is all about. Maybe that person wants to do this. Like, there's all of these thoughts swirling through people's heads. But when you actually back up and you ask students, hey, if you're in that situation, would you want to step in and do something? And 90+% of students say yes. But when you ask them whether or not they think their peers would do something in that situation, it drops like 50%. So there's this big social norms misperception that happens that keeps good, well-intentioned people from doing the things that they want to do, that we want them to do. And it really comes down to just them not knowing that those healthy behaviors are actually the norm. So having that data really allows you to engage them and say, hey, when you want to do something in that situation, 9 out of the 10 people around you want to do the same thing, and they're going to support you.
Yeah, because I think as much as you don't like market to people being like, hey, person abstaining from alcohol, do you want to come out to this like, alcohol-free party or whatever? Like, sometimes you can do that. I think that there's like sometimes like threading a needle, like you got to do it very, strategically and smartly. But sometimes I think it's like calling people out and like they don't want that. But I think at least even the idea of what you're saying, it's like that you can plaster posters around saying like 90% of first year students at, college, university, like want to be positive bystanders or something. And that really can like help shape a culture. Is like, yeah, again, because a lot of this is like, people just, they're responding genuinely and earnestly, to these questions in a survey, that you can pull that together and really try to influence your culture in a really, I think, affirmative and positive way. But I think getting really efficient with, analyzing your data and all that, like that's where the technology comes in, or, serving up the, the outreach, to people, providing nudges and all that. Because I think it's just like, yeah, there's all these tools to do all these sort of things. So even just speaking very broadly about like, harness this tool to, achieve any number of goals that you have to hopefully, just create that outcome of a positive, engaging, supportive, affirming campus culture and everything. So, yeah, I mean, this is tough work. I think, because like you said, I mean, we've been kind of talking, kind of across the whole sort of student life cycle here. This is complex, nuanced, difficult, long, longitudinal work here, harnessing technology to, do all these things and, under the backdrop of all the other like factors that we're talking about here. But so I'm the eternal optimist. I always like asking this question, whether it is just sort of, taking your cues from what's, maybe some bright spots in higher ed, or, however you might want to take this question. What keeps you motivated, hopeful, and excited about this work?
So drawing on the central topic that we're talking about today and the impact of affirmative action, rollbacks on enrollment. And when you go back several decades to 1970, white students comprised over 90% of higher education enrollment. And in the decades that followed affirmative action, colleges and universities have become increasingly diverse, with students of color now representing close to 50% of enrolled students in 2021 higher education data. So no matter what you believe, that's a clear demonstration about what's possible when levers like policy and practice and social activism come together to drive change. And I believe that making college feel like a viable option that is more accessible to more people is a really good thing for individuals, for society. Higher ed, to me, has the ability to transform lives and communities, shaping the next generation of parents and leaders and conscientious global citizens. So I'm excited about what we're finding. I think we've got to keep our eyes focused on, we got 1 year of data now following the affirmative action rollback. We've got to keep collecting that data, keep triangulating all the different perspectives, keep learning from where schools are able to be resilient in the face of these kind of universal policy changes and how their individual practices are helping to drive that and create those communities that ripples into the messaging that they're sending into prospective students that make them want to go there. And I'm really excited about the potential that well-being as not just a mission investment, but a real business driving investment has on student success across the life cycle, from how we talk about who we are to a generation of students that are socially conscious, that are activism oriented, how that investment in well-being, in safety and health, in belonging helps to create an environment where everybody has the ability to do and be their best. And that shows up in their classroom performance. It shows up in the way that they're engaged, which is ultimately going to make them persist at higher rates. It's going to help them build skills that are more successful when they graduate from college and go into their jobs. And we've got to be telling that story about how the inside and outside the classroom experience are shaping you into a better future job candidate that's more likely to lead in the future. And, quite frankly, it's helping to build an experience that's going to help someone be more likely to give back as an alum. Like, there's just so much good that comes out of doing good for your community. And so I'm excited and I'm hopeful about that as well.
Yeah, I think it's, the anecdote or kind of quote that people share a lot is that like the future has arrived, it's just not evenly distributed. And that like, especially in higher ed with, it's very long history and traditions and everything, that like, it's going to take a long time for like the past to kind of fade away and everything, like certain, ways of operating and being, certainly just with the prevalence of like digital education, online learning and everything else, like, certainly digital transformation, just like the way that institutions operate and, do all those things. Like we've seen, bright spots that are motivating and inspiring of like, the impact of what these tools can help achieve, which like was achievable, to a very limited few before. Like it's even just like the idea, like we're proving out these classic theories of like, student success and everything just in kind of a new way, a new format. And it's just, more accessible and broadly applied to more people. And like we should be able to create a structure for higher ed, like just like that this option is available to all who want it, like that it doesn't feel as though this door is closed, for often like arbitrary reasons or whatever. But So as we wrap up here, I feel like with this topic, again, we talked about all we could without having this episode be 4 hours long. If people want to keep the conversation going or keep doing kind of their homework or reading or kind of engaging, listening and all that, any resources, things you'd want to share, kind of give a tip of the hat to, or just sort of closing advice, I guess, for folks, as they're considering all these sort of, headwinds and different variables and things happening, but also just trying to think through their strategy of how to kind of harness digital transformation to achieve all these goals that we've been talking about.
Dustin, there is no singular one size fits all solution. It's all, a comprehensive investment schools have to be making. And, certainly funding and financial aid is really critical. How and where we recruit is really critical. Having data to inform decision making is really critical. How we create scalable foundations of learning, but then take that data and meet people where they are and really curricularize the outside the classroom experience is really important. How we keep measuring success, how we network with colleagues that are doing good work and pushing the needle forward on innovation, and how they're proving that out in rigorous ways and measuring their successes. That's all part of the mix. And Vector is going to be there as a partner in that landscape for schools. I'm happy to share a very recent publication that we put out, looking at this year's first year students. They're not just the first year implicated from the rollback of affirmative action, they're also the first cohort of students that spent the entirety of their high school experience in a world impacted by COVID. All 4 years of high school impacted these students. And we wanted to look at them and see, how did that affect them? We got to know that stuff, right? And we found some really interesting stuff. This COVID cohort of students is a generation that's defined by contradictions. They value mental health, diversity, and personal responsibility, yet they're reluctant to act when they're faced with difficult situations. They know that intervening is important to keep their community safe, but they prefer indirect methods that minimize personal risk. They feel increasingly disconnected from their peers, from faculty and staff, despite sharing common values. Gosh, we could continue for 4 more hours, Dustin, talking about the sort of ... implications of all of those contradictions, but knowing it doesn't give you just the answers. It allows you to ask the next question better. We always have to keep asking better questions and keep getting better answers as we serve and support our students.
Beautiful anecdote and kind of inspirational words to wrap up on. Really appreciate you kind of sharing your insights and reflections and everything, offering up the data that you have that you've been doing with your team there. Because I think that, that's part of it of keep asking questions, keep asking new different questions, kind of being curious and really trying to, just kind of open yourself up to just the possibilities of what can be new, better, different, and challenge your assumptions or kind of preconceived notions. And I think that is sort of what will hopefully enable, institutional leaders to kind of start that process of, like you said, there's not going to be one way that any of this looks, but I think you'll see a lot of examples out there, see those bright spots, and you're I want to do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, because we have our, smaller, tight-knit community that we're going to approach differently about, kind of getting insights or building community versus larger institution or, one that's embraced maybe more of hybrid, learning and different things. So I think that's just, we're going to, I think, continue to see a lot of differentiated versions of how, institutions are supporting their students, getting those insights, building community, creating, those sort of the curricular approach, outside the classroom to make sure that students feel, they're getting that kind of personalized experience and community that shares their values and all these things. So I feel we could certainly talk about this for a lot longer, but we will leave it there. Certainly appreciate you again being on, talking about what you did and sharing the resources and things because, that's always my hope is that this is the introduction. This is just the beginning of the conversation. Folks can keep it going. I hope they do. And again, just thank you for giving some of your time to talk about this very big subject to kind of kick off our season this year.
So glad to be here, Dustin.
The Hired Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances you'll like all the other Enrollify shows too. Our Podcast Network is growing constantly, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks all designed to empower you to be a better hired professional. Our shows help you find your next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from people like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Dave Kibbolds, and Eddie Francis, as well as so many other of your favorite leaders in higher education. Enrollify is made possible by the support of Element 451. The leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.